Hello, and welcome to tonight's journey into the unknown. Tonight, we will explore 3 chilling tales from the woods, each one a true story of camping trips that went terribly wrong. These are true scary camping stories, slow and atmospheric, perfect for listening as you drift off to sleep. Before we begin, make sure you are comfortable. Let your body relax, and allow your imagination to wander into the quiet shadows of the forest, where every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, could be something waiting to be discovered. Tonight, you will hear about campers who thought they were safe, who believed the forest was calm and familiar, but they were wrong. Our first story takes us to a late autumn night, when a young man named Daniel went camping alone in a remote part of the forest. He was experienced, confident, and thought he knew what it meant to sleep under the stars. But this night, the forest had other plans. Story 1: Alone in the Woods, a true scary camping story. Our story begins in late autumn, when the nights are long and the wind carries the sharp scent of fallen leaves. The forest had taken on that quiet, almost sacred stillness. Every step seemed louder than it should, and every rustle of leaves made the hairs on the back of your neck rise. A young man, let's call him Daniel, decided to go on a solo camping trip. He wasn't an inexperienced camper, far from it. He had spent many nights under the stars, feeling comforted by the rhythm of nature. But this trip was different. He chose a remote section of the forest, one that had almost no visitors. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something about it that seemed untouched, unobserved. He arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly through the trees. Daniel set up his small tent in a clearing, a modest space surrounded by thick pines. He built a small campfire, the flames dancing softly, illuminating the forest in a warm orange glow. As he sat, roasting a small meal and listening to the crackling fire, he felt that familiar peace. The kind only those who sleep under the stars know. But as night fell, a subtle unease settled over him. The forest, once welcoming, now felt different, almost as if it were watching. Building tension. It started with small sounds. First, the rustle of leaves, distant, almost like footsteps. Daniel thought nothing of it. Animals, probably. Deer or raccoons. But then he heard something more deliberate, a snapping twig, followed by another. He paused, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Hello," he called softly, more out of curiosity than fear. No reply. Just silence, heavy and complete. Minutes passed. Then he heard it again. A faint whisper, almost carried by the wind. But it wasn't the wind. He could feel it. Someone, or something, was out there. Moving. Watching. Daniel told himself to stay calm. He checked his gear, made sure his knife was nearby, and tried to focus on the fire. He repeated to himself that he was safe, that he was alone, and that this was just his imagination. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The first encounter. Hours passed. The fire dwindled to glowing embers. Daniel decided to get into his sleeping bag, hoping that sleep would calm his nerves. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, he thought he heard breathing outside the tent. Slow, deliberate, almost in rhythm with his own heartbeat. At first, he told himself it was a raccoon. Or maybe the wind through the trees. But then he felt it, a shadow moving past the thin fabric of the tent. Not a trick of the firelight. A shape, large and deliberate, moving silently. Daniel froze, clutching the zipper of his tent. The shadow paused, as if studying him, waiting. Then, without warning, it was gone. Silence returned. The forest seemed to exhale. He didn't sleep well that night. Every small noise, every movement of the branches, sent him into a panic. But as the first rays of morning touched the treetops, Daniel felt some relief. Daylight, he thought, would bring safety. A strange discovery. In the morning, Daniel packed up, planning to leave. But as he walked along the narrow forest trail, he noticed something strange on the ground. Footprints. Human footprints. And not just any human footprints, they were large, irregular, and deep, as if whoever made them was heavy. What chilled him more was that they circled around his campsite. In the soft soil, he could see clear signs that someone or something had been observing him all night. His stomach turned. He should have felt anger, maybe fear, but the truth was far more primitive, pure, unfiltered terror. Daniel didn't linger. He moved quickly along the trail, trying to convince himself that maybe someone was playing a prank, that he had imagined the worst of it. The forest closes in. But the forest didn't let him go that easily. By midday, the shadows had lengthened again, and the trail seemed unfamiliar. He had been walking for hours, but the trees around him felt different. The path he thought he knew had vanished, replaced by dense underbrush and gnarled roots. Then he heard it, the whisper again. Louder this time, as though someone was standing just beyond the tree line. "Hello, hello," it called. Not one voice. Many voices, overlapping, echoing. Daniel's fear became palpable. He ran, dodging low-hanging branches, his breath ragged. The whispering followed him, carried on the wind, sometimes behind him, sometimes to his side, always just out of reach. Eventually, he stumbled into a clearing. And there, in the center, was a strange sight, a circle of stones, carefully arranged, with deep scratches in the dirt inside the circle. It was ancient, ritualistic, and unmistakably human. But no one was there. And yet, Daniel felt eyes on him. All around. He could feel it, heavy and oppressive, pressing down through the canopy of trees. The final night. Night fell again, and Daniel realized he couldn't make it out of the forest before darkness. He tried to follow his own trail, but the forest had erased it. The whispers grew louder, more persistent, almost mocking. He set up a temporary camp, hugging a tree and keeping his small knife in hand. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle, every movement in the shadows, felt like it could be the end. Hours passed. He tried to remain calm, reminding himself that he was rational, logical, and trained for the outdoors. But deep down, he knew he wasn't alone. Something was here with him. Watching. Waiting. Suddenly, he heard its footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Circling. Around him. Closer. closer. His heart pounded. He whispered a prayer under his breath. Then, a shadow moved past the corner of his eye. Large. Tall. Human-shaped, but not quite human. He didn't see it clearly, but he knew it was there. And that was enough. Enough to make him run. By morning, Daniel had found the trail again, somehow, following instinct rather than sight. He emerged from the forest, exhausted, shaking, and pale. He never returned to that spot. The forest, as beautiful as it can be, holds secrets. Some of them are old. Some are patient. And some are, still watching. Daniel's story is one of many, and it is a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, there can be something waiting just beyond the firelight. This is one of the true scary camping stories that continues to haunt those who venture too far, too deep, into the unknown. So, the next time you go camping, remember, the forest is calm, quiet, even inviting. But sometimes, it is not empty. Sometimes, it remembers. And sometimes, it waits. The next story is about a couple seeking a peaceful weekend away from the city. Emma and Jake thought a secluded clearing would be the perfect escape. But some parts of the forest are patient, and they soon discovered that not all whispers of wind are natural. Story 2, The Campground That Wasn't There, a true scary camping story. Welcome back. Tonight, we journey into the woods, a place of quiet beauty, but also of lingering mystery. The story I have for you is slow and deliberate, meant to creep under your skin as you listen. One of those true scary camping stories you'll remember long after the fire has burned out. Tonight, we meet a young couple, Emma and Jake, who decided to spend a weekend camping in a remote forest, far from the usual crowded campgrounds. They were experienced campers, confident and well prepared. But they were about to discover that experience sometimes isn't enough. Setting the scene. It was early October, the air crisp with a hint of winter. The leaves had turned fiery shades of red and gold, crunching beneath their boots as they hiked deeper into the forest. They found what appeared to be a quiet, secluded clearing and decided to set up their tent there. As the sun began to set, the forest seemed to change. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, weaving between the trees. A wind picked up, whispering softly, almost like a voice just beyond hearing. Emma brushed it off. "It's just the wind," she said. But Jake wasn't so sure. There was a stillness to the forest, an unnatural quiet, like the world was holding its breath. A strange encounter. After dinner, they sat by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the flickering light. But soon, Emma noticed something odd. A small trail of footprints in the mud, leading toward the woods. Not animal tracks, human. But the strange part? They were bare feet. Maybe someone passed by earlier, Emma suggested. A day hiker, maybe. But the footprints were too fresh. And they weren't leading away, they were leading toward them. Hours passed. The couple tried to sleep, but the wind carried distant noises, snapping branches, the sound of something moving, but never clearly visible. When they awoke in the middle of the night, they found their tent flap slightly open. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved, except the footprints had grown in number. Now there were dozens of them, circling the tent, some leading into the darkness beyond the clearing. The Whispering Forest. Emma and Jake stayed up the rest of the night, flashlight in hand, watching the tree. That's when it started soft whispering. At first, barely audible, like a secret carried on the wind. "Who's there?" Jake called, his voice trembling slightly. Silence. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping, repeating words they couldn't understand. Emma felt her heart pound. She grabbed Jake's hand, and they huddled together, afraid to look outside. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, even the distant call of an owl felt sinister. They never saw anyone or anything, but they could feel eyes on them. Watching. Waiting. The unseen presence. By the time dawn approached, the couple was exhausted. They decided to leave immediately, packing their gear as quickly as they could. But as they stepped onto the trail, something strange happened. The path they had hiked in on seemed gone. Every turn they tried led them back to the same clearing. It was as if the forest had shifted overnight, trapping them in a labyrinth of trees. Panic set in. Then Jake noticed a movement out of the corner of his eye, a shadow slipping between the trees. It was tall, unnaturally tall, moving with a slow, deliberate stride. They called out, but it didn't respond. It didn't run. It simply watched. They ran blindly through the forest, the whispers following, growing louder, more insistent, almost mocking. The clearing that wasn't there. Hours later, they stumbled into a new clearing, one that looked familiar yet entirely alien. In the center was an old, decrepit campsite, a rusted lantern, a torn tent, and footprints circling a fire pit that hadn't been there before. Emma froze. That's exactly where we were yesterday," she whispered. But nothing made sense. The fire pit was cold, the ashes grey, and the air thick with the scent of smoke, as if a fire had recently burned there, but they had made no fire. Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder, surrounding them, echoing through the trees. And then, they saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, tall, with limbs that moved slightly wrong, almost too long, and a face obscured in darkness. It didn't move toward them, not yet. It simply stared. And in that moment, they felt it. The forest was alive. And it was not pleased. Escape and reflection. Somehow, by pure instinct, they ran. Branches whipped their faces, roots caught their feet, but they kept going. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, they couldn't tell. Eventually, they burst out onto a dirt road, far from the forest, near a small ranger station. Breathless, trembling, they explained what had happened. The ranger gave them a knowing look. "That part of the forest, people go in, but sometimes they don't come out the way they went in," he said quietly. Emma and Jake never returned. They never camped again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, they say they can hear whispers in the darkness, like the forest is reminding them it's still there, still watching. This is one of those true scary camping stories that reminds us, the forest is beautiful, but it has secrets. Sometimes it seems welcoming, serene, even magical. But sometimes, it's patient. And it waits for those who wander too far, who believe they are alone. So, the next time you plan a camping trip, remember this story. Listen to the wind. Watch the shadows. And remember, some parts of the forest are best left unexplored. Sleep well, if you can. Finally, we follow a group of friends on a multi-day adventure, who soon found themselves lost in a forest that seemed alive. Mark, Lila, and Kevin would experience a terror that would follow them far beyond the shadows of the trees. This is a story of whispers, figures in the darkness, and the relentless patience of the forest itself. Story 3: The Camper Who Vanished, a true scary camping story. Hello, and welcome back. Tonight, I bring you a story that unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, but its weight lingers long after the fire has burned down. This is one of those true scary camping stories that makes you question the safety of the woods, even when they appear calm and inviting. Our story begins with a group of friends, Mark, Lila, and Kevin. They were college students, eager to escape the city for a weekend, seeking adventure in a remote forest far from roads and civilization. The journey begins. It was late September, the air crisp and cool. The forest was alive with the smell of pine and damp earth. They hiked for hours, following a narrow trail marked only by faded blazes on the trees. Their laughter echoed through the woods, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. They found a small clearing beside a creek and decided it would be their campsite. Mark, the most experienced camper, quickly set up the tent while Lila and Kevin gathered firewood. As the sun dipped low, shadows stretched across the forest floor, the trees forming shapes that seemed almost human. They made a fire, and for the first time, the forest seemed to welcome them. But as darkness fell, a strange sensation crept over them, a subtle, almost imperceptible feeling of being observed. The first night. That night, the forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Only the fire crackled, the sound sharp and distinct in the stillness. Mark had been telling ghost stories, light-hearted ones, to calm the nerves. But somewhere deep in the woods, a response waited, silent and patient. Around midnight, Kevin woke first. He thought he heard someone moving outside the tent, rustling the leaves. At first, he assumed it was a deer or raccoon, but then he noticed something strange. The rustling seemed deliberate, measured, almost like footsteps circling the tent. Mark! Lila, wake up, Kevin whispered. The others stirred. For a moment, they heard nothing. Then, a low, almost inaudible whisper, carried on the wind, "Go." No one moved. The wind died. Silence returned. But the unease remained. Morning discovery. The next morning, they found unusual marks around their campsite, deep scratches on the trees, footprints that didn't match any animal they knew, and the fire pit strangely disturbed, as if someone had crouched over it in the night. "We must have imagined it," Lila said, though her voice trembled. But the footprints circled the camp, growing more numerous and more erratic the further they traced them into the woods. The friends decided to leave immediately. They packed up quickly, following the trail they had hiked in on. But the forest seemed to have changed. The familiar path disappeared, replaced by twisted roots and dense undergrowth. Lost in the woods. Hours passed. Panic began to set in. Every turn they took led them back to the same clearing. It was as if the forest had reshaped itself overnight, trapping them inside. Then the whispers returned, louder this time. Words they couldn't understand, overlapping. Like multiple voices layered upon each other. They echoed through the trees, bouncing off trunks, always just behind them, sometimes to the side. Mark tried to keep calm. "Stay together," he said. "We'll find the road if we keep moving." But the deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. Shadows seemed to move independently of the firelight, and branches appeared to reach toward them, as if trying to stop them from leaving. The second night. By evening, exhaustion and fear had set in. They were forced to camp again, this time under a canopy of dense trees. The fire was small, insufficient to push back the dark that pressed in from all sides. It began slowly. First, the whispering. Then, a faint tapping on the trees around them, rhythmic, deliberate. Then, footsteps, circling the perimeter of their small clearing. Kevin swore he saw figures between the trees, tall, thin, almost humanoid but always obscured by shadows. Every time he pointed, they vanished. Lila began to cry softly, clutching herself, whispering prayers. Mark tried to keep them focused, but even he felt the pressure, the gaze of unseen eyes upon them. The night seemed endless. Hours passed in silence, punctuated only by the snapping of twigs and the occasional whisper, always out of reach, never fully revealed. The third day, a terrifying sight. On the third day, they tried again to find their way out. The forest seemed to mock them, paths twisting, the same clearing appearing repeatedly. Then, in a distant clearing, they saw it, a small campsite, abandoned, burned remnants of a fire, and something that made their stomachs turn, a small wooden figure carved crudely, human in shape, with scratches across its surface. It seemed to stare at them. Mark felt a sudden dread. "We're not alone," he said. "We've never been alone." As they watched, the shadows deepened. Movement flitted along the edge of their vision. The whispers returned, closer now, more insistent. And then they saw them, figures, tall and thin, gliding silently through the trees. They never spoke, never came close, but the presence was undeniable. Watching. Waiting. The escape. By nightfall, panic reached its peak. The friends ran blindly through the forest, following instinct rather than sight. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices screaming silently in their minds. Branches tore at their clothes, roots tripped them, but they pressed on. At last, they stumbled onto a dirt road, exhausted and trembling. They didn't look back. The forest behind them seemed quiet, almost peaceful. Too peaceful. When they returned later to tell their story, locals gave them a strange look. "That part of the woods, people don't always come back the same," one old man said. "And sometimes, they don't come back at all." This story reminds us that the forest is beautiful, but it has its secrets. Some areas are ancient, patient, and perhaps even sentient. When you camp in the wilderness, remember this story. Listen to the whispers of the wind. Watch the shadows. And never assume you are truly alone. For some forests, some clearings, they wait. And when they find visitors who are unprepared, they do not let them go easily. Sleep well tonight, and if you ever venture into the woods, remember, the forest is patient. And the forest remembers. And so, our journey through the forest comes to an end, at least for tonight. These stories remind us that even in the quiet beauty of the woods, there are secrets. Some are ancient. Some are patient. And some are watching. If you ever find yourself camping in the wilderness, listen to the whispers of the wind. Watch the shadows, and remember, the forest is not always empty. Some parts wait for those who wander too far, and they may not let them leave the same way they came. Sleep well tonight, and if you hear a rustle in the darkness, remember these true scary camping stories.